Hello, dear listeners and viewers. Welcome back to another episode of Coaching Unpacked. You are very, very welcome. My name is Chris, and I am your host for today. I was your host last time and the time before as well. That's just a happy accident. I'm joined by my wonderful friends and colleagues. Adam, how are you, Adam?
I'm very, very well. Very excited for today as well.
I know, because you've been, well, I don't want to say what you've been doing because that's going to give away what the episode is about. But Sarah, are you well as well?
Yes, yeah. They're looking forward to this. It's great to spend the evening with you.
It is, and we are going to be spending the evening together, having a great time unpacking coaching. Adam Colback and Sarah Cotting, they're just bringing the light and the fire to our podcast. And we just want to say, actually, thank you so much to everyone who's been watching and listening. We've had nearly 400 downloads of our first two episodes, which, considering it was invented in a WhatsApp group via voice noting, I think is quite an achievement. So thank you to everyone who's supporting and listening. We've so far had an episode on cause and effect. Last episode was on mismatch, and I'm going to not waste any time in handing over to Sarah, who can tell us all about what today's episode is all about.
Great, thank you, Chris. So today we're going to be responding to a few people who wanted to focus on rehearsal. So rehearsal is one of the mechanisms that the EEF found was useful for catalysing professional development, and headed up by Sam Sims. A research team kind of looked at what these mechanisms could be. Rehearsal was one of them. So we want to delve into that today and focus our coaching conversation on the rehearsal part of the conversation. So we're going to dive straight in, Adam, unless you want to add anything in particular.
No. Only just, I say no and then
so yes. You lied, basically. That's not a good way to start a podcast.
I do that all the time. I go, someone said, do you want to add anything? I go, no. And then I add something. Just to say, like, big thanks specifically to Adam Robbins, because I had a couple of messages backwards and forwards on X from Adam.
Yeah, of course.
Really pushing this thing about rehearsal. And I'm really grateful that he did, because we think rehearsal is super, super important to this approach to coaching. And Adam really kind of was asking some great questions that allowed us to kind of crystallize that. So firstly, thanks a lot to Adam. And secondly, thanks a lot to Sarah as well, because Sarah, although she says she's well, she's actually not feeling very well this evening, and she's going to coach anyway. So what a hero.
Well, you're both heroes to me. Can I ask you a question before we get started? Rehearsal, some people find it a little bit icky. I remember the first time I ever went to an RSA, the Royal Society of Arts. We went to like an event, and I took my head teacher along, and it's a networking event. It's about education. Let's go. And we got there, and we stood in a circle, and a man passed a hat around, and you had to introduce yourself via the hat, and it was a drama man. Now, I'm a performer myself. I work with many performers. I've not got anything against these eponymous drama people, but I tell you, I wanted the earth to swallow me up, and I wanted to die violently in that moment. And when somebody says the word rehearsal to me, I'm in a theatre, I'm in a drama studio, I'm making a fool of myself, and I get very, very nervous. So are we looking at that kind of rehearsal, or are we, with this kind of coaching conversation, are we looking at it less about being about that and more about just building maybe habits within the teacher's practice? I don't know.
It's a really, really good question.
Thanks.
And I think what you'll see is, like, when we actually do it, it feels a lot more natural than what people think it is. And maybe we can kind of unpack that a little bit more afterwards as well. But fundamentally, I think the biggest issue is that people confuse it with role play. In role play, you're playing the role of someone you're not, or something that you're not. Like, we're teachers. We are all teachers. So I'm not role playing being a teacher. I am rehearsing the actual teaching that I am actually going to do, because I am actually the actual teacher.
Actually,
that helps a lot. I think helps a lot if you can get people in that mindset of, like, you're practicing rather than, we're calling it rehearsal, but ultimately you're practicing what you're going to do. I think people are more comfortable with that.
I think that's the name of Richard Curtis's new film, isn't it? Teaching, actually. That's what's coming out now.
That'd be a good Christmas film.
I think so. I'm going to stop rabbiting on. People on here for me. Right. Sarah, take it away.
People are absolutely here for you. I think that makes up 75% of our 400 downloads. 25% is the other cotting hats and cotting hams in the world. So yeah, we're gonna dive in. I just want to say one other thing that was really helpful that a coach once said to me about rehearsal, which was, like, imagine that the modelling and the rehearsal is literally the teacher saying to the coach, well, can you just show me what you mean? And the modeling is them showing you. And then the rehearsal is like, okay, well, can you just show me what you mean by it? Show me that you kind of get it. And that sort of helped me to make it more, help me understand why you want to be doing it. But hopefully through listening to rehearsal that Adam and I are going to do now, we're going to kind of try to highlight afterwards and unpack afterwards, and with Chris, what the different reasons are that we might want to do rehearsal. And then I think we should link to, Adam wrote a brilliant blog on all the different reasons why rehearsal can help. So we can link to that as well. So let's dive in. So as we say, we're going to focus on that rehearsal part, the modelling, the rehearsal, kind of the feedback aspect of it, etc. So we're going to kind of skip the beginning part of the conversation. So we want you to imagine that Adam is working on a technique called self-interrupt, because the issue he's been having is that children have been interrupting him, and he's been stopping and telling them to stop interrupting and to listen, and it's taking up quite a lot of learning time by telling them that. So we've decided that self-interrupt might be a good technique for him to adopt in order to meet his goal. And the goal that we've said that Adam's got in this situation is to make sure that interrupting is not a social norm in his classroom, and to make sure he can continue with the learning as quickly as possible. So we're going to dive in now to the part of the conversation where I'm going to talk to Adam about self-interrupt and the success criteria, so the things that seem to make the technique work. Ready, Adam?
Ready to rock.
Hello, intrepid listeners and viewers to the Coaching Unpacked podcast. This is our rehearsal episode, and what you're about to hear and see is a sample of a lesson where Adam is teaching Year 2 English. Hope that helps.
Okay, so Adam, we talked about self-interrupt, and I just want to go through the success criteria in front of you. So the first one is that you stop as soon as you hear the interruption. Mm-hmm. Second one is that you look straight ahead and you've got quite a neutral, almost like blank expression. The third one is that you hold the silence. So hopefully the student will stop interrupting you and you just hold that silence for just a moment longer. And then you go back to the beginning of your sentence and carry on with what you were saying. So given that those are the success criteria, I just want to take a moment to analyse how they might help you to meet your goal of making sure interrupting is not a norm and continuing with the learning as quickly as possible. What do you think?
Okay, so I suppose going back to the goal then, it's to make sure that interrupting isn't a social norm. If I take that part of the goal, social tends to sort of refer to groups and communities. And I suppose that by signalling to that one student that I'm unhappy with that interruption, then I'm also signalling to all of them that I would also be unhappy with any further interruption. And so although it's a message directed at one, it kind of has the effect of also sending that message to all of them.
Yeah, potentially and hopefully. And there are some other criteria in there that really support that point about continuing with the learning. So you're stopping as soon as you hear the interruption. So that's helping to build that social norm, and it's making sure we can correct it and move on and get on with the learning as quickly as possible. You are holding that silence for just a second to really signal that, like, this is not acceptable, this is not a social norm, and then getting back on with it. And then you're going back to the beginning of your sentence. Why do you think you go back to the beginning of your sentence?
Well, I guess like building on what you just said there. So I guess the other part of the goal is about the getting on with learning as quickly as possible. And that's because learning is the focus of what you're actually in that room to do. And so I guess we're also going, right, I'm going to hold that silence because there's no point in me. I cannot possibly risk continuing to speak if I haven't got everybody's attention and if everybody's not absolutely on me, because what I'm about to say is so important. I can't afford to risk anyone missing it. And I guess therefore going back to the beginning of the sentence, I guess what I'm saying is what I'm about to tell you, or what I've already tried to tell you, is so important. I also can't take the chance on anyone having missed that. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the sentence just to make absolutely sure that everyone's got it, because it is that important.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier on when we were talking about self-interrupt that Liam, who was the student who interrupted you in this situation that we're talking about, that he might feel a little bit rubbish about the way that the self-interruption and the way you're reacting. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, Liam's one of those characters that like he's impulsive, so he wouldn't necessarily. I don't think he calls out because like he genuinely wants to disrupt the lesson. I think it's just he's excited and sort of makes a connection between something I've said and like his own experience and just wants to share it and can't sort of stop himself. And I wouldn't want to kind of kill that enthusiasm. So I guess I'm a little bit worried that if I do this, am I going to sort of dampen his enthusiasm to contribute further on?
Okay, yeah, interesting. So hold that in mind as well. You're going to see the model. We'll come back to that, and we'll see how it feels and how you think Liam might react to it as well afterwards. So have a look at those success criteria as I model self-interrupt. I'm going to need you to be Liam in this situation, and I am going to be the teacher, and we're just going to pick up in exactly the same scenario that you were in. So I'll be talking about sharing and you'll interrupt. Can you remember what Liam said when he interrupted? So you're ready?
Yeah. So we've been reading a book about sharing your things, and we were talking in this lesson about sharing feelings. And he said there's not going to be any sharing going on this weekend.
Okay. So watch out for the success criteria. See how you think it feels, and remember to interrupt me. For listeners who are watching on YouTube, I want to stand up and do this properly, but I've got headphones on that are going to ping out and it's not going to be good. So imagine that I am standing up. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about sharing and we've been reading a book about sharing. And in the book,
It's not going to be any sharing this weekend.
In the book, it talks about sharing physical things like your toys and your food, but we also want to talk about sharing things that aren't physical, like your feelings. Okay, Adam, talk me through what success criteria you saw there and how it seemed to you.
So stopping as soon as you hear the interruption, that definitely felt like it definitely sent that message that, oh, actually, this is really important. Like you haven't just continued and then you're sort of stopping and coming back to me later. And that definitely sort of felt like you were sending the signal that I'm stopping because the learning's been interrupted, not because I'm annoyed on a personal level and feel disrespected on a personal level. So I thought that was interesting. So I wasn't expecting it to feel like that. Looking straight ahead, again, because you're not doing anything, it's actually sort of allowing me thinking space to sort of consider, oh, why has she stopped? She stopped because of me. She really doesn't want me to do that. Right, I'm gonna rein it back in. Whereas I think if you'd have done something else or looked at me or done something else, I would have been listening to what you were saying at that point, but I wouldn't have been reflecting myself. The silence was just long enough for it to start to feel uncomfortable, which was interesting, but not so long that I felt like, victimized, I guess. And the fact that you went back to the beginning of the sentence, like I almost wonder if there's like a restorative element to that as well, because it's like, okay, you've started to speak, I've interrupted, so it's actually it's on me, but you've forgiven me, and so therefore you're going back to the beginning of the sentence to give me another opportunity to hear that bit that I missed through my own interruption.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't actually considered that. That's a really good point about going back is almost like a reset and a refresh. Yeah. And thinking about your concern about like Liam maybe feeling a bit ostracized afterwards. How do you feel like you might need to reintegrate him, and how do you think you might do that?
Well, I guess like there's a bit there which is like the very fact that you went back to the beginning of the sentence, like that reset kind of addresses that to an extent. But then probably what I would also do is just kind of find another time later on in the lesson, take him to one side, have a chat with him, explain exactly why I'd interrupted, why I stopped, and why that's a problem, and just make sure that relationship's better.
Okay. Do you think that that's like, I suppose what's going on in my head, I'm thinking like having a conversation with him might change like what is quite a quick technique to sort of get everybody back on track, might make it a bigger thing than it actually is. So if we're saying this is like a really least invasive, and we've talked about that quite a lot, haven't we? Least invasive ways of dealing with things, that maybe there might be a least invasive way of kind of reintegrating him back into the class if he does feel like that. Is there something you can think of that might be more least invasive?
Yeah, I suppose, if the idea is about reintegrating him back in, it's a learning environment that I'm trying to reintegrate him back into. So I guess if I asked his opinion of something that we later on discuss, or ask him a question, and if he gives me a response that is appropriate and shows that he's listening, perhaps then it's an opportunity to praise, and that in itself sort of rebuilds the relationship.
Nice. And that also focuses on the learning. That's part of your goal. Get everyone kind of focused on the learning and thinking about the learning. Okay, so you've seen the model. I'd like you to have a go now. So you can kind of show me how you understand this technique going. And it's very different to seeing it or reading the success criteria on paper to actually doing it. So give it a go, and then we'll have a look at how you're doing those success criteria. We'll do exactly the same thing. You'll be talking about sharing, and I'll be interrupting as Liam did.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm obviously taking my position at the front of the class. I'm ready to go. Okay, everyone. So this afternoon, we're going to be talking again about sharing. Now, sharing is something that we've discussed a lot recently when we read this book. But when we were reading this book, we were most of the time thinking about sharing.
There won't be any sharing going on this weekend.
Okay, so earlier on when we were reading this book, we were thinking about sharing physical things like our toys and our food. But today we're going to be moving on to thinking more about sharing things that aren't physical, like sharing our feelings.
Okay, Adam, great. So you did stop as soon as you heard me. So that was one of our success criteria. You did look straight ahead and it was neutral. You did hold that silence as well. However, when you went back to the beginning of the sentence, you kind of said, you went, okay, so.
Did I?
And it sounded a little bit like you were kind of a bit irritated at that point. And I was wondering, when you did that, whether that might detract a little bit from your goal, which is just to kind of get learning back on track, and that your concern that you had about Liam feeling a little bit ostracized afterwards, that might contribute. What do you think?
I would have absolutely just doubled down on him feeling like that if that is how he felt, wouldn't I? That's so interesting. So I wouldn't actually have picked up on that myself. That's probably just like a natural thing that I'm doing.
Okay, so if we want to make it about the learning and we want to focus it on getting everyone kind of back into the zone, we might take out that okay. Well, we will take out that okay, so aspect of it. So let's give that a go again, and try and be aware that when you go back to the beginning of the sentence, you're just going to go back to the beginning of the sentence straight after the silence.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay, everyone. So this afternoon, we're going to be talking about this book. And when we've been reading this book recently, we've been talking about sharing. And we've been talking about sharing.
There won't be any sharing going on this weekend.
We've been talking about sharing in the context of sharing our toys or sharing other physical things. But today we're going to talk about sharing in the context of sharing things that aren't physical, like sharing our feelings.
So you didn't use okay, so, but I think in the thought process that you had to have to not use okay, so, you missed out on that longer silence. So that silence was better the first time when you had that longer pause. So let's try again.
Okay, cool.
Putting it all together this time.
Okay, here we go. Right, everybody. This afternoon, we're going to be thinking about sharing. And we've been thinking about sharing quite a lot lately when we've been reading this book. And in this book, we thought about sharing in the context of sharing physical things.
There
like
won't
sharing
be any
our
sharing
food.
this weekend.
We've been thinking about sharing in the context of sharing physical things, like sharing food or toys. But today, we're going to think about sharing things that aren't physical, like sharing our feelings.
Okay, you had the silence longer there, and actually I felt that slight discomfort and that feeling of like, I can see the whole class, that social norm part. I see that the whole class registering that that's not okay. Like Adam is not going to continue until that interruption is over. So listeners, we'd probably go over that a few more times, because Adam is still got quite a lot of cognitive load going on, trying to keep in mind the success criteria, and we want it to be a little bit more fluid. But we're going to move ahead with the conversation just for time on our podcast. So Adam, now we've rehearsed, I want us to think about the question we always ask ourselves, which is, we come back together next week and self-interrupt hasn't worked. Why?
Right. If it's not going to work, 100%, it is going to be either because Liam doesn't stop or because another child finds it funny and then they don't stop. Like, that's what it's going to be.
Okay. So if that happens and another child bursts out laughing, what do you do?
I'm really not sure, to be quite honest.
Okay. So we've spoken a lot about least invasive and like creeping up that ladder. So you've done something with self-interrupt, which is non-verbal and not directed at the student, in the sense that you haven't looked at that student, you're just looking straight ahead. So the next rung up that ladder would be something non-verbal but directed at the student. So what might you do?
I guess I could give like a non-verbal gesture towards that student. So maybe like just move my hand down like this, as in like calm down. So if the child starts laughing, calm down. Gestures
definitely the right thing. I wonder if like something that would communicate really clearly exactly what you want is like finger to the lips.
Okay, yeah. I guess because hand down like that, they could think I'm just telling them to sit down, in which case they'd go, well, I am sat down. So yeah, like this.
And how long are you going to give that signal before you escalate again?
My gut would be not as long as the silence, only because if I've got a long silence and then I've got a long finger on lips, then this whole episode ends up being quite long. And then people are going to, the information that I was communicating before this all started is going to become really transient as a result of that.
Yeah, nice. So we want to keep to that goal of getting learning back on track quickly, don't we? Okay, so let's imagine one more rung up the ladder. Then you do the finger on the lips, and the interruption continues.
Yeah.
What's next?
School policy is that that would be a demerit at that point. So I would
worked
say,
on this. What do you say?
So I say, Sarah, that's a demerit. Silence.
Sarah, that's a demerit. Silence. Okay. Yeah, I think that would work. So just running through them all together, just tell me how you'd creep up that ladder.
Okay, so I'm going to go. The first thing I'm going to do is give that general non-verbal, which is the looking straight ahead and returning back to the beginning of the sentence. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give a directed non-verbal, which is going to be the finger to the lips, because it spells out exactly what it is that I want from that student, it tells them what I want them to do. And the third thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to direct it and make it verbal. So Sarah, that's a demerit. Silence now, please.
Okay. Sounds good about the ladder. You've got those three things, and we've worked on some of those before. Just want to pick up on one thing we have worked on with vocabulary. You said please at the end. Remember what we spoke about the power of... Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, it should be thank you, because please almost comes across as a little bit hopeful, whereas thank you, there's like an inevitability to thank you. Like I'm thanking you for it because I know you're going to do it. So there's an inevitability to it, which then also makes it maybe feel a little bit warmer as well. But at the same time, also communicates really high expectations that this is something that I'm just expecting. So I can already dish out the thank you.
Great stuff. Okay, so we're going to cut our coaching there and unpack now, hopefully, the kind of multiple ways that rehearsal can potentially help in coaching. So really interested in Chris, who was listening to all of that, in your reflections.
That was it was fascinating to watch, because one of the key things for me as a singer is that, when this is going to seem completely disconnected, but as soon as I explain it, you'll understand. I used to have singing lessons, and the best thing a singing teacher can do is have singing lessons. And taking it out of education, I would go to my singing teacher and she would go, "You're doing this thing again that I keep telling you about." And I would always be telling my singing students about it, but it would require my singing teacher to tell me to, "Oh God, yeah, I tell all of my pupils this all day, every day to do it." And what I found uniquely interesting about this rehearsal process was that nothing you were telling Adam was necessarily new in the scenario. It was something that you had previously covered. It wasn't coming across as patronizing. It wasn't coming across as you manipulating him into an area or something that he didn't want to go down because it was your ideology. It was, we've looked at that. Can you remember when we did this? What about this? Remember that kind of worked this time, didn't it? And do you remember when we had that conversation? Because not only through this podcast we've and through all our conversations we've had online with so many wonderful people, the classroom is a uniquely complex environment. That makes the head of a teacher a uniquely complex environment. And sometimes this rehearsal is about distilling those moments of the obvious that the teachers miss, because they're thinking about so many different things in that moment, that the if-thens, that the decision-making that's so crucial at this point is spoken about because it's just assumed. And I really, really liked that about your very gentle approach to that coaching element that made Adam kind of, he would have come away from that potentially going, I haven't learned anything new. I've just been reminded of the stuff, the bread and butter. I've just been reminded of my practice and I need to put that in. I found that fascinating.
Do you know what I think massively on that? And this is a big thing with rehearsal, is that rehearsal draws your attention to tiny little details that you would probably otherwise miss. Like that one in there. That's why we put it in there. This idea of please and thank you. Like, am I, just by talking about it with Sarah, am I really going to have thought about, right, am I saying please or am I saying thank you? And what is please communicating? What's thank you communicating? I just don't believe that would come out. Whereas when you rehearse it, it's right there in front of you and you feel it. You go, there was something jarring a little bit in there.
Yeah.
It's the please. What other word? We could use thank you. Why thank you, not please? So a huge use of rehearsal is that it directs your attention towards these tiny, tiny little things. And in so doing, it builds your mental model. Like, building mental models doesn't just happen through discussion. It happens through rehearsal, because like with that in there, that using thank you instead of please for this reason, think of a decision driver. My decision driver would be that thank you communicates an inevitability and a warmth, and please communicates hope. And I want warmth and inevitability, thank you. That adds something to my mental model, but I only get that through rehearsing it and feeling it. So I can't stress that one enough, personally. I think it's massive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you just don't know the details until you actually get up and do it. And you also can't like feel the impact of it until you kind of get up and do it. Or if it's a planning technique, sit side by side, talk about it, work through it. I think what's really crucial is like the success criteria is just on paper until we bring it to life, and what it actually means kind of doesn't come to life until we actually rehearse it as well. And I could feel myself doing something that I've realized I do, which is with people I'm coaching, if it's new stuff, take it a bit slower and like really unpick why. But if it's just stuff that we've covered, not in like a I'm irritated with you kind of way, but in a sort of like, come on, we should know this by now. It's not please, it's thank you. Like that high expectations kind of like, Adam, we've been through this, like, you know, this needs to be a habit now type kind of thing. And that's like a professional respect for Adam, that I just want him to get better, and I don't want him to forget the stuff we talk about in our coaching, and I want him to build it into the habit. So you can really, through rehearsal and touching on those details, convey your really high expectations of that teacher as a coach, I think, as well.
Can I ask then, in that situation, on behalf of everybody listening and watching, it was such an element of cognitive load that Adam forgot the third criteria. He forgot to have the silence there when he was talking to Liam, who sounds like a joy. But how, as a coach, are you then going to expect him to record and remember that? Has he got a notepad with him? Is he mapping this out? Because obviously that wasn't involved in that moment. He wasn't given time to write that kind of stuff down. In a real life scenario, where is the recording of that going to be taking place? And is it beneficial in the moment? Do you have to stop your coaching flow to go, write that down? A bit like in English, don't just keep listening to me, make sure you're making notes. Or do you give time at the end for summative notes, that kind of thing? What would be the best thing to do?
Yeah, that's a nice logistical question. back when I started coaching, and we were kind of breaking techniques down ourselves, or using a Teach Like a Champion to really kind of try to do that, it would be like recording it, often like writing it up on board during rehearsal and then recording it afterwards. Now we've got quite a few platforms which have this available, and you can store it and go back to it. So I think logistically it's been made a lot easier. I do think that rehearsal, like the power of success criteria, is so important, because it drives the rehearsal. It's what you're tight on. It's what you're saying makes this technique work, whatever technique it is. You can be loose on some aspects of the technique that can be made bespoke to the teacher and their class and their context, but those things need to be tight too. And as a coach, a success criteria is super useful, because that's what you feed back on. You're not feeding back on anything and everything. You're focusing usually on those things, and there's this informal contract there between you and the coachee that, like, this is what I'm looking for and this is what we're working on, and it hangs the modeling, the practice or rehearsal, and any kind of like feedback and getting it right. It hangs that all together. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, again, couldn't agree more. Like I used, I did a coaching session on observation today, and the coaching session for that is going to be tomorrow. So we use StepLab at our school, and I think it's brilliant for exactly this, because I think where people can sometimes get hung up on this kind of thing is they go, oh, but if the technique has already got like predefined success criteria, what if those success criteria don't match to the situation that we're in? So you just change them and tweak them. And to my knowledge, like StepLab's the platform that I know best, and you can change the success criteria on there and customize them to make them fit to exactly what you want that step to actually be for the teacher. And I think sort of co-constructing that and almost going, because another thing that coaches say is, well, what if I've already decided what the success criteria are going to be, and what if then the teacher thinks there should be something slightly different? Like, do I stick to what I already thought, or do I change them? I think you co-construct them, and you can almost start that by going, look, this is what I've come up with. Let me show you. Then let's have that conversation afterwards about, do we want to tweak those success criteria? Is there anything that we want to change in that? Is there any context that you can add, teacher, that's going to mean that one of these isn't going to work, or we definitely have to change it in a certain way? So starting from what the coach has already got, what the coach thinks, and then adapting it from there based on that co-construction, I think is again really, really undervalued. But if people do that, I think they'll be really impressed with the results.
Yeah, that sounds really sensible, and yeah, still allows you to have those success criteria and quite like fruitful, deep discussion about like teaching in a way that you just don't get the time to think about. Like, why hold the silence? Why like the minutiae of teaching, which teachers tend to really like talking about, like really, because it's that's their craft, isn't it? They get to speak about that. There's one thing I want to touch on. I know we're kind of like speeding through this podcast to make it a nice amount of time for people to listen to, but people out there who are potentially worried about using rehearsal with teachers, it happens a lot, and just advice around how to support teachers into that rehearsal and getting used to it. And there are obviously different types of rehearsal. There's the rehearsal that Adam and I did, where it was like get up and practice a technique that you're going to deliver. And there's rehearsal around, say, like planning some multiple choice questions and the thought process that goes into doing that, for example. So there's planning stuff too. And people tend to be quite worried about those performance rehearsals a little bit more, I find, than planning. So I just wondered, Adam, if you could kind of give some tips for anyone who wants to like support their coachee into doing this rehearsal.
Yeah, I think firstly, like go slow and go nice and gently with it. But I think the biggest single thing is to jump up and model it yourself first, and like take critique from the teacher on it. Like if I'm ever coaching someone and it's like the first session I've done with them, I will model, and sometimes not very often, but there have been times where I've deliberately modeled something that I think they will probably not like, or deliberately model something that they'd be able to look at and go, oh, I'm not sure about that for my class, to give them the opportunity to go, oh, I'm not sure about that. And I go, yeah, you think? Okay, cool. Let me just run it one more time. Let me know what you think of this one. And then, so we're kind of using my modeling to get, and like that kind of refining of my model first, to get to the point where we're like, Right, okay, you're happy with how that looked when I did it? Yeah, happy with that. Okay, great. Give it a whirl. And then I sit down, so often sort of I sit down, avoid eye contact, and by the time, and I then look up and they're stood up. And as soon as you've got them out the chair, they're going to do it. Because it's harder at that point, once they're out the chair, it's harder for them to sit back down than it is to just give it a go. But I think the big thing I would say with it is, like I say, just dive in, model it yourself, and model that sort of vulnerability, as Chris talks about a lot. Model that vulnerability of having your model critiqued, and they are way more likely then to jump into rehearsal themselves.
Yeah, nice.
I was just about to say that it's the vulnerability there, the ability to have them feel psychologically safe in that moment to maybe get up and do something they would otherwise not do. They do it every day. That's the point. That's their job. They get up and do it every day. The difference is that they're doing it in front of a peer, a colleague, and for some people that'll be even worse because they're doing it in front of someone who is potentially superior to them in the hierarchical structure of the school. And if I give a bad answer, if I do this wrong, am I being observed? That all of those things need to be got rid of in order for a bit like we do with our young people. We need to get them to a place where they feel psychologically safe, whatever you have to do as a coach to make them feel relaxed. And obviously the example that you've given today is so useful, but it is an artifice. It's placed in a separate space and time, and it's acknowledging that there's a lot of work that has to happen before you get to that point. But
Absolutely.
my key takeaway from this is that it's going to be worth it, because by the time you get there and you only have to give that side glance and they're up and doing it, your job of allowing them to have that moment of self-discovery and kind of going, I can do this. I haven't learned anything new necessarily in terms of acquired new knowledge. I've just remembered. I've remembered what my craft is. I've remembered good teaching. I've remembered our previous conversations, and use that for the benefit of their classes. I can't think of anything better, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something so important there. That I was running a coaching course last year, and the teacher said this to me. They were like, "You're calling this low stakes rehearsal. This feels way more high stakes than when I do it in front of the kids." And I was like, "Oh my God, I just didn't really think about it like that." But it doesn't feel low stakes. So having Adam, who is a deputy head, like usually coaching people who are not quite as senior in the school, being vulnerable and doing that is really powerful. And we can also do things like just, teachers, get your teachers who are coaches, get your scaffolding tricks and tips out of the drawer, because it's basically like, get them to do it sitting down first, get them to script it and read off a script to start with. Like, do anything you can to sort of like ease them in quite gently with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can kind of build up to things being successful, because the cognitive load of doing it is high, even with like reasonably quote unquote simple techniques. And because we're a bit stressed because, there's someone in front of us who we don't want them to think that we're a terrible, terrible teacher.
Like just to add one like final thing, I was doing a session with a trainee teacher this morning, and during the model, I got kind of like probably like a third of the way through it, and I wasn't happy with it, and so I didn't feel quite right. Let me start again. And I think I didn't do that on purpose. I genuinely just got it wrong, but that was quite a nice moment, because for her to see that actually I've been going sort of 16 years or so, but like this is still hard for me to like run something through like that. It just adds that sort of human element to it, that like if you mess it up as well, just do what I just did. Just go, I'm gonna run that one again.
Brilliant. Listen, both, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for spending your evening with me rehearsing. I've taken so much from today. I've got a coaching session tomorrow. My accidental I did a coach session. Can't wait. And I'll have to let you guys know how that gets on. But anybody out there, we are coaching Unpack on X. I'm sure we'll be moving to Blue Sky soon. Everybody else is. But you can contact us on there. So many people have. And that's where today's episode came from. So as we head towards Christmas and look towards the new year, anything that you think we should be covering that's going to help you in your coaching career, you need to let us know. And as you can see, we'll build you an episode. Why would we not do that? But thank you so much. Reach out, share, have a listen back to them, and check out all of the cognitive coaching that Sarah's doing. And of course, if you want to listen to any of the EduPulse podcasts that are on this channel as well, you are more than welcome. But it's It's a pleasure to have you all listening and having such lovely feedback. Oh, I've gone all gushy, guys. I didn't mean to. But I guess it's a goodbye from us, and we'll see you all soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
See you next time.